Welcome to a world where ancient prophecies collide with modern reality. Imagine waking up tomorrow to news broadcasts showing stars literally falling from the sky, oceans turning to blood, and supernatural beings walking among us. What if the book of Revelation wasn't just spiritual metaphor, but a precise blueprint for events about to unfold in our lifetime? Could you distinguish between breaking news and biblical prophecy? Would your smartphone capture the end of the world as we know it? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. 2,000 years ago, on a rocky island prison called Patmos, an old man named John received the most terrifying vision in human history. Tonight, we discover what happens when that ancient prophecy becomes tomorrow's reality. Chapter 1. The Final Prophecy. The waves crashed against the jagged rocks of Patmos as John the Apostle sat in his cave prison. The Roman Empire had banished him here for preaching about Jesus, thinking isolation would silence God's messenger. They were wrong. On this desolate island, John would receive visions so powerful and terrifying that they would haunt humanity for 2 millennia. "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day," John later wrote, "and I heard behind me a great voice like a trumpet." What followed was a cosmic download of future events that would make the most imaginative science fiction seem tame by comparison. John saw scrolls with 7 seals that, when opened, would unleash catastrophes beyond human comprehension. The first seal revealed a white horse whose rider carried a bow and wore a crown, conquering the earth through deception. The second brought a red horse, taking peace from the world and making men kill each other. The third horse was black, its rider holding scales that brought famine so severe that a day's wages could barely buy enough food for one person. The fourth horse was pale green, ridden by Death himself, followed closely by Hades. But John's visions grew even more intense. He saw stars falling from heaven, like ripe figs shaken from a tree during a mighty windstorm. The sun became black as sackcloth, and the moon turned blood red. Mountains and islands moved from their places as every person on earth, from kings to slaves, hid in caves begging the rocks to fall on them and hide them from God's wrath. John witnessed 7 angels with 7 trumpets, bringing plagues that would make Egypt's 10 plagues look like minor inconveniences. Hail mixed with fire and blood would burn up 1/3 of all trees and grass. A great mountain burning with fire would crash into the sea, turning 1/3 of it to blood and killing 1/3 of all sea creatures. A star called wormwood would fall from heaven, poisoning 1/3 of all fresh water and causing many people to die from its bitterness. The old apostle saw creatures so bizarre that human language could barely describe them. Locusts with faces like men, hair like women, teeth like lions, and tails like scorpions would torment people for 5 months. Their sting would be so painful that people would beg to die, but death would flee from them. He saw 4 angels bound at the Euphrates River who would be released to kill 1/3 of mankind with an army of 200 million horsemen breathing fire, smoke, and sulfur. Early Christians reading John's account believed they were living in the last days. They expected Jesus to return at any moment, bringing with him the events John described. Every earthquake, every eclipse, every war seemed like a sign that the end was near. They were so convinced that many sold their possessions and waited on hilltops for Christ's return. Yet here we are, 2,000 years later, and John's prophecy remains unfulfilled. Or does it? Modern readers of Revelation face the same questions that puzzled ancient Christians. Are these literal events that will happen exactly as described, or are they symbolic representations of spiritual truths? Could the strange creatures John saw be his ancient mind trying to describe modern military technology? Might the cosmic catastrophes be nuclear war seen through first-century eyes? Chapter 2. Signs in the Heavens. The ancient world lived under an open sky. Without electric lights drowning out the stars, people noticed every change in the heavens above them. They tracked the phases of the moon, predicted eclipses, and watched meteor showers with mixture of wonder and terror. To them, the sky was God's billboard, displaying messages for those wise enough to read them. Biblical prophecy is filled with cosmic signs that will announce the end times. Joel the prophet declared that the sun would turn to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Jesus himself warned that there would be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and that people would faint from fear at the powers of heaven being shaken. The blood moon phenomenon has captured modern attention because it seems to match biblical descriptions perfectly. When Earth passes between the sun and moon during a lunar eclipse, our planet's atmosphere filters the sunlight, allowing only red wavelengths to reach the moon's surface. The result is a moon that appears deep red or copper-colored, exactly like blood. What makes this even more intriguing is that these blood moons sometimes occur on Jewish feast days, leading some to believe they're divine appointments with prophetic significance. Pastor John Hagee popularized the idea of blood moon tetrads, 4 consecutive lunar eclipses falling on Jewish holidays. He noted that such tetrads occurred during major events in Jewish history, including the expulsion from Spain in 1492, Israel's independence in 1948, and the Six-Day War in 1967. When another tetrad occurred in 2014 to 2015, many believers wondered if it signaled the beginning of end times events. Solar eclipses carry even more dramatic prophetic weight. When the moon passes between Earth and the sun, day becomes night in minutes. Ancient cultures viewed this as a cosmic battle between good and evil, or as a divine warning of coming judgment. The prophet Amos specifically mentioned God making the sun go down at noon and darkening the earth in broad daylight as a sign of the end times. Meteor showers provide another potential fulfillment of biblical prophecy. When Earth passes through debris fields left by comets, hundreds or even thousands of shooting stars can streak across the sky in a single night. To ancient observers, this would indeed look like stars falling from heaven. The Leonid meteor shower of 1833 was so intense that it terrified observers across North America, with many believing the second coming was imminent. Modern astronomy has identified even more dramatic cosmic events that could match biblical descriptions. Gamma-ray bursts from dying stars can release more energy in 10 seconds than our sun will produce in its entire lifetime. If one occurred close enough to Earth, it could strip away our ozone layer, causing the sky to appear to roll up like a scroll, while deadly radiation bombarded the planet's surface. Coronal mass ejections from our own sun pose another threat that ancient minds might interpret as divine judgment. These massive solar storms can disable satellites, knock out power grids, and create aurora displays visible far from the poles. A sufficiently powerful solar storm could cripple our technology-dependent civilization while painting the sky with supernatural-looking lights. The question facing modern believers is whether these natural phenomena fulfill biblical prophecy, or whether the end-time signs will be clearly supernatural events that defy scientific explanation. Will the stars literally fall from heaven, or will humanity witness cosmic catastrophes so unprecedented that they seem to match ancient prophecies? As our understanding of the universe expands, the line between natural disaster and divine intervention becomes increasingly blurred. Chapter 3: The Moment Everything Changes. It begins on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Coffee shops are busy, commuters check their phones, and children head to school. The sun rises, as it has for billions of years, giving no hint that this day will be humanity's last taste of normal life. Then, at exactly 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the first trumpet sounds. It doesn't come from any earthly instrument. The sound seems to emanate from the sky itself, a haunting, beautiful, terrifying note that penetrates every building, every vehicle, every human heart. Social media explodes instantly. Trumpet sound begins trending within minutes as videos pour in from every continent. The sound is identical everywhere, the same pitch, the same otherworldly quality that makes seasoned audio engineers insist it can't be artificially produced. Within an hour, the first physical manifestation appears. Hail begins falling, but this isn't normal ice. Mixed with the frozen pellets are drops of what appears to be blood and chunks of burning material that don't extinguish when they hit water. Emergency services are overwhelmed as fires break out across the globe. The mixture is impossible to analyze. The blood contains no DNA, and the burning material defies chemical identification. Stock markets crash before noon. The Dow Jones loses 30% of its value in the first 2 hours of trading before circuit breakers shut down the system entirely. Cryptocurrency markets, operating 24 hours globally, see Bitcoin and Ethereum collapse as panicked investors try to convert digital assets to physical goods. Gold prices skyrocket, but physical gold becomes impossible to find as dealers are mobbed by desperate buyers. Religious leaders find themselves thrust into an impossible situation. Calls flood churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples as people demand explanations. Some clergy hesitate to declare this the fulfillment of prophecy, worried about causing panic. Others embrace the moment, seeing vindication for a lifetime of preaching about the end times. Televangelists experience their highest viewership ever as people desperately seek spiritual guidance. Scientists scramble to provide natural explanations, but their instruments record impossible readings. The blood in the hail shows no biological markers, yet appears to be genuine human blood. The burning material burns at temperatures that should incinerate it completely, yet it remains solid. Atmospheric readings show no unusual chemical signatures that could explain the phenomena. For the first time in modern history, the scientific community faces events that appear to violate fundamental laws of physics. Government responses vary wildly. Some nations declare martial law immediately, suspecting enemy attacks using unknown weapons. Others issue calming statements about unusual but explainable atmospheric phenomena. Intelligence agencies work frantically to determine if any nation possesses technology capable of producing these effects. Military satellites detect nothing abnormal, yet the phenomena continue spreading globally. The internet becomes humanity's collective nervous system, carrying real-time updates of each new impossibility. YouTube removes videos claiming the events are fake, while conspiracy theorists insist they're elaborate government hoaxes. Live streams from every major city show the same inexplicable events unfolding simultaneously across time zones. The hashtag #revelation starts trending alongside #trumpet sound as millions make the biblical connection. Emergency broadcasts interrupt regular programming as governments struggle to maintain order. President after president appears on television urging calm while clearly struggling to comprehend the situation themselves. The United Nations calls an emergency session, but what can world leaders do when the phenomena show no sign of responding to human intervention? By evening, 1/3 of all vegetation has burned. Satellite imagery shows swathes of destroyed forests, cropland, and grasslands across every continent. Agricultural futures markets cease functioning as it becomes clear that global food production has just suffered a catastrophic blow. Grocery stores experience panic buying as people realize the implications of losing 1/3 of all plant life. Chapter 4: Digital Apocalypse. The second trumpet sounds 7 days later, just as the world begins to process the first catastrophe. This time, the sound comes from the ocean depths, a deep, resonant note that vibrates through water and into the hulls of every ship on Earth. Within minutes, maritime communications start reporting impossible sights. Something massive appears to be falling from the sky into the Pacific Ocean. Satellites tracking the object lose it in Earth's atmosphere before impact, but seismic sensors record an impact equivalent to a magnitude 9.0 earthquake centered in the deep Pacific. The object appears to be a burning mountain the size of Manhattan, glowing with intense heat as it plunges into the ocean between Hawaii and Japan. No space agency had tracked any asteroid of this size approaching Earth. The consequences unfold in real time across social media platforms. Ships near the impact zone broadcast desperate mayday calls before their signals cut to static. The massive displacement of water creates tsunami warnings across the entire Pacific Rim. But these aren't normal waves. Sailors report that the water has turned deep red, like blood, and has a metallic taste that burns the mouth and throat. Within hours, marine biologists around the world begin reporting mass die-offs of ocean life. Fish, whales, dolphins, and countless smaller creatures wash up dead on shores from Alaska to Australia. The death toll isn't random. Exactly 1/3 of all marine life in the Pacific dies simultaneously. Oceanographic research vessels confirm that 1/3 of the Pacific Ocean has literally turned to blood, though scientists cannot explain how or why. Internet infrastructure begins failing as underwater cables connecting continents suffer damage from the supernatural tsunami. Social media platforms struggle to handle the massive spike in traffic as billions of people try to share updates, videos, and theories about the unfolding catastrophe. Instagram crashes entirely under the load of apocalyptic imagery. Twitter's servers overheat from the constant stream of second trumpet posts. Telecommunications satellites start malfunctioning in ways that baffle engineers. The satellites remain in their proper orbits and show no signs of physical damage, yet they're producing increasingly garbled signals. Phone calls drop mid-conversation. Video conferences freeze with distorted images. Text messages arrive hours late or not at all. It's as if the very electromagnetic spectrum is becoming unreliable. The global supply chain, already reeling from the destruction of 1/3 of all vegetation, suffers another massive blow as Pacific shipping routes become impassable. Container ships refuse to enter the blood-red waters, where sea life floats dead in massive mats of decay. The stench is reportedly visible from space, as satellite images show dark patches of decomposing organic matter covering thousands of square miles. Fishing industries collapse overnight. Japanese fishing fleets, among the world's largest, dock indefinitely as their catches come up dead or contaminated with the strange blood-like substance. Fish markets from Tokyo to Seattle close as health authorities declare all Pacific seafood unsafe for consumption. Sushi restaurants worldwide shutter their doors, unable to source safe fish. Cryptocurrency mining operations suffer catastrophic losses as their high-powered computers begin producing random errors. Blockchain networks that require precise mathematical calculations start producing inconsistent results. Bitcoin transactions that should take minutes begin taking hours or failing entirely. The technological infrastructure of the digital economy proves surprisingly fragile when faced with supernatural interference. Amateur radio operators report increasingly strange phenomena. Signals that should travel predictable paths instead bounce erratically around the globe. Operators in New York find themselves connected to stations in remote villages in Africa, while nearby transmissions fail to reach their intended destinations. The ionosphere itself seems to be fluctuating in impossible ways. Emergency services struggle to coordinate responses as their communication systems become unreliable. Police dispatchers lose contact with patrol cars. Fire departments can't reach their trucks. Hospital networks fail just when they're needed most to treat victims of the contaminated water. The very technology that connects modern civilization begins working against itself. Chapter 5. The 144,000 Chosen. As the third trumpet prepares to sound and chaos engulfs the planet, something extraordinary begins happening to specific individuals across the globe. In a small apartment in Brooklyn, David Goldstein wakes up with a strange burning sensation on his forehead. When he looks in the mirror, he sees nothing unusual, but he feels fundamentally changed, as if he's been marked by an invisible hand. Sarah Cohen, a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, experiences the same sensation during her morning prayers. Thousands of miles away in Ethiopia, a Jewish refugee named Aaron feels the identical burning, followed by an overwhelming sense of purpose he's never experienced before. They don't know it yet, but they're among exactly 144,000 people receiving a divine seal of protection. The marking isn't random. DNA testing companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA report unprecedented demand as people desperately try to trace their lineage to the 12 tribes of Israel. Genetic markers that were previously ignored suddenly become the most important information on Earth. Hidden Sephardic Jewish ancestry, buried for centuries under Catholic conversions during the Spanish Inquisition, suddenly surfaces in family trees across Latin America. Dr. Rachel Stein, a geneticist at Stanford, notices patterns in her data that shouldn't exist. Exactly 12,000 people from each of 12 distinct genetic lineages are experiencing simultaneous physiological changes. Their brain scans show increased activity in regions associated with spiritual experience. Their blood work reveals elevated levels of compounds that don't match any known human biology. Most remarkably, they appear to be developing immunity to the supernatural plagues affecting everyone else. The chosen ones find each other through encrypted messaging apps and secure forums. Despite having no previous contact, they report identical visions and a shared understanding of their mission. They're to serve as witnesses during the coming tribulation, protected by God, but tasked with sharing the gospel message with a world spiraling into chaos. Government intelligence agencies notice the pattern quickly. The NSA's data mining algorithms flag the unusual communication patterns between these individuals. The CIA attempts to interview several of the chosen ones, only to discover they possess knowledge they shouldn't have access to. They speak languages they never learned, understand complex theological concepts despite having no religious education, and demonstrate an uncanny to predict the next supernatural events. Religious authorities struggle to understand this development. Some Jewish rabbis insist these individuals must be blessed by God, pointing to ancient prophecies about a remnant being preserved through the end times. Christian pastors debate whether this proves their theology correct or challenges their understanding of salvation. Islamic scholars examine their own texts about the chosen ones who will emerge before the day of judgment. The marked individuals begin experiencing supernatural protection that defies explanation. When Michael Rodriguez, a construction worker from Phoenix, drinks contaminated water from the blood-red Colorado River, nothing happens to him while his co-workers become violently ill. When Rebecca Nakamura walks through areas affected by the burning hail, the flames seem to bend around her. Security cameras capture these incidents, but the footage is so unbelievable that many assume it's been digitally altered. Social media influencers among the 144,000 find their follow accounts exploding as people desperately seek hope in the escalating catastrophes. Their live streams draw millions of viewers who report feeling strangely comforted by their words, even when discussing the terrifying events unfolding globally. YouTube's algorithm begins promoting their content automatically, though engineers can't explain why the system is behaving this way. Medical researchers studying the chosen ones discover their DNA contains sequences that don't match any known human genome. These genetic markers appear to be recent additions, as if their cellular structure has been rewritten at the molecular level. The implications are staggering. Someone or something has the ability to edit human genetics in real time across thousands of individuals simultaneously. The 144,000 begin organizing into 12 groups of 12,000 each, though they receive no external coordination. Each group develops specialized knowledge and abilities related to their tribal identity. Those from the tribe of Levi demonstrate unusual understanding of religious law and ritual. The tribe of Dan produces exceptional leaders and organizers. The tribe of Naphtali develops remarkable communication skills that work even when technological systems fail. Chapter 6: Religions Collide. The Imam Abdullah Hassan had been teaching at Cairo's Al-Azhar University for 20 years, but nothing in his scholarly training prepared him for the phone call he received at 3 a.m. His most devoted student was calling from Mecca, where he had gone for Hajj, reporting that the Kaaba itself was glowing with an inexplicable light that didn't appear to be coming from any earthly source. "Teacher," the young man whispered into his phone, his voice trembling with awe and terror. "The hour is upon us. The signs are exactly as the Prophet described." Hassan's hands shook as he reached for his copy of the Hadiths, the recorded sayings of Muhammad that contained detailed prophecies about Yawm al-Din, the Day of Judgment. The trumpet sounds, the stars falling, the seas turning to blood. Every sign was matching Islamic prophecy with terrifying precision. In New Delhi, Swami Rajesh Anand sat in deep meditation when the vision struck him like lightning. The ancient Sanskrit texts he had studied for decades suddenly blazed with new meaning. The Kalki Purana's descriptions of the final avatar seemed to be unfolding in real time. The signs of Kali Yuga's climax, moral decay, natural disasters, and the breakdown of Dharma were reaching their prophesied crescendo. But according to Hindu cosmology, this wasn't the end of everything, merely the end of this cosmic cycle before the universe renewed itself. Rabbi David Stern found himself in an impossible position as leader of one of New York's largest Orthodox congregations. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the first trumpet sounded, with congregants demanding to know if this was the coming of the Messiah. The problem was that the events matched Christian interpretations of Jewish prophecy more closely than traditional Jewish expectations. The Tanakh spoke of the day of the Lord and the ingathering of the exiles, but Judaism had always taught that the Messiah would bring peace, not cosmic catastrophe. Buddhist monasteries across Asia reported similar confusion. The Dharma taught that all things were impermanent and that suffering came from attachment to the material world. The current global catastrophes seem to validate Buddhist teachings about the illusory nature of physical reality. Yet the supernatural elements challenged the religion's generally naturalistic worldview. How could monks who denied the existence of a personal God explain events that seemed to demonstrate divine intervention? The convergence became impossible to ignore when Islamic prophecies about Isa, their name for Jesus, began aligning perfectly with Christian expectations of the Second Coming. Both traditions taught that Jesus would return during the end times, though they disagreed about his role and nature. Imam Hassan found himself secretly wondering if the Christians had been right about Jesus' divinity, a thought that would have been heretical just weeks earlier. Hindu scholars pointed out that their tradition had always acknowledged multiple avatars of the divine, making it easier to accept that different religions might contain partial truths about the same cosmic reality. The Bhagavad Gita taught that God appeared in whatever form devotees could understand, suggesting that Allah, Jesus, and Krishna might all be valid manifestations of the same ultimate reality, responding to humanity's final crisis. Indigenous shamans and medicine men reported that their spirit guides had been warning them about these times for generations. Native American prophecies spoke of the end of the Fourth World and the beginning of the Fifth. Mayan calendars had pointed to this era as a time of transformation. Aboriginal Australians recalled Dreamtime stories about the world's renewal through cosmic fire and flood. African traditional religions found their ancestral prophecies suddenly relevant on a global scale. Dogon cosmology had long described the universe as cyclical, with periods of destruction and renewal guided by star beings. Their oral histories contained remarkably specific descriptions of cosmic catastrophes that matched current events with startling accuracy. The Pope called for an extraordinary interfaith council, bringing together religious leaders from every tradition to address the crisis. For the first time in history, the world's major religions found themselves forced to acknowledge that they might all be describing the same divine reality from different perspectives. The meeting was broadcast globally, with billions watching as humanity's spiritual leaders struggled to provide unified guidance. Chapter 7: The Economic Collapse. The third trumpet sounded on a Thursday morning, and with it came the collapse of the global financial system. The star called Wormwood, a massive celestial object blazing like a torch, crashed into the headwaters of the Volga River in Russia. Within hours, the contamination spread through Eastern Europe's water supply, making 1/3 of all fresh water on Earth bitter and poisonous. Stock markets that had been hemorrhaging value for weeks went into complete freefall. The London Stock Exchange lost 80% of its value in a single day before trading was suspended indefinitely. The New York Stock Exchange followed suit, with the Nasdaq and Dow Jones experiencing drops that made the Great Depression look like a minor correction. But this wasn't just about investor panic. It was about the complete breakdown of the systems that made modern commerce possible. Agricultural commodities became the new gold standard overnight. Wheat futures skyrocketed to prices never seen in human history as traders realized that 1/3 of all fresh water, essential for irrigation, was now contaminated. Corn, rice, and soybean markets followed suit. Countries with access to clean water sources found themselves holding the world's most valuable resource. The cryptocurrency market, which many had seen as a hedge against traditional financial collapse, proved equally vulnerable to supernatural intervention. Bitcoin mining operations found their calculations producing increasingly erratic results, as if the mathematical constants underlying computer processes were becoming unreliable. Ethereum's blockchain began showing impossible transaction records, trades that claimed to have occurred before they were initiated, digital signatures that verified correctly despite being mathematically impossible. Central banks worldwide attempted to stabilize their currencies by printing money, but physical cash became nearly worthless as people hoarded food and clean water instead. The Federal Reserve's emergency measures included helicopter drops of currency that literally went ignored as citizens focused on securing basic survival necessities. For the first time in modern history, money itself became meaningless. The revelation came through a leaked document from the World Economic Forum. A coalition of surviving governments and major corporations had been developing a new global digital currency system designed to function even during the supernatural disruptions. The system would use quantum-encrypted blockchain technology that claimed to be immune to the strange computational errors affecting other digital systems. But participation in the new economy would require more than just digital wallets. Citizens would need to receive a quantum-encrypted identification mark that could be scanned biologically. The technology involved microscopic quantum dots injected under the skin, invisible to the naked eye, but readable by specialized scanners. The mark would be placed on the right hand or forehead for maximum scanning efficiency. Religious leaders immediately recognized the biblical implications. Revelation 13:16-17 had warned that no one would be able to buy or sell unless they had the mark of the beast on their right hand or forehead. The parallels were too obvious to ignore, yet the practical alternatives seemed impossible. Without the quantum ID system, people would have no access to food distribution networks, medical care, or employment. The 144,000 marked individuals found themselves in an impossible situation. Their supernatural protection extended to survival without the quantum mark, but they watched helplessly as friends and family members faced the choice between spiritual compromise and physical starvation. Some of the chosen ones tried to share their protected food and water, only to discover that their protection didn't extend to others. Black market economies emerged in areas where the quantum ID system hadn't been fully implemented. Barter networks sprang up using pre-catastrophe goods, precious metals, and clean water as currency. These underground markets operated in constant fear of government raids, as possession of unregistered goods became classified as economic terrorism under emergency laws. The enforcement was brutal but efficient. Quantum scanners were installed at every store, gas station, pharmacy, and food distribution center. Attempting to purchase anything without the proper mark resulted in immediate arrest and re-education. The technology worked flawlessly, too flawlessly, as if it were being guided by intelligence beyond human capability. Chapter 8. Scientific Explanations. Fail. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years building her reputation as one of the world's leading atmospheric physicists, but nothing in her education or experience had prepared her for the phone call from NOAA headquarters. The data coming from their most sensitive instruments was impossible, readings that violated fundamental laws of physics so completely that her first assumption was equipment failure. "Run the diagnostics again," she told her research team at MIT for the fourth time that morning. The results were identical. The blood that had turned 1/3 of the world's oceans red showed properties that couldn't exist according to known chemistry. It had the cellular structure of human blood, complete with red blood cells and plasma, but DNA analysis showed genetic sequences that didn't match any known organism on Earth. The temperature readings were even more baffling. The burning material from the first trumpet blast maintained a constant temperature of exactly 451 degrees Celsius, the ignition point of paper, regardless of environmental conditions. Whether submerged in liquid nitrogen or exposed to open flame, the temperature never varied by even 1/10 of a degree. Dr. Chen's team had studied samples under electron microscopes, subjected them to spectral analysis, and bombarded them with every form of radiation available to modern science. The material simply shouldn't exist. At CERN, the world's most advanced particle physics laboratory, Dr. Marcus Weber was having his own crisis of understanding. The Large Hadron Collider had been shut down after producing collision results that contradicted the standard model of particle physics. Particles were behaving in ways that suggested the fundamental constants of the universe were fluctuating. The speed of light, measured countless times over the past century, was now showing variations that made Einstein's theories unreliable. NASA's most sophisticated satellites were recording cosmic radiation patterns that defied explanation. The electromagnetic spectrum itself seemed to be shifting, with new frequencies appearing that didn't correspond to any known stellar phenomena. Radio telescopes around the world were picking up signals from deep space that appeared to be organized and intelligent, yet came from directions where no known galaxies existed. The medical community faced their own impossible discoveries. Doctors treating victims of the contaminated water reported symptoms that didn't match any known toxicology. Patients showed cellular damage consistent with radiation poisoning, but their blood work indicated exposure to biological agents that couldn't be identified. Most disturbing were the reports of spontaneous healing among certain individuals, complete reversal of terminal illnesses with no medical intervention. Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez, head of emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins, had documented 17 cases of medically impossible recoveries in the past week. Cancer patients showing complete tumor regression overnight. Paralyzed accident victims suddenly regaining full motor function. Most remarkably, several patients who had died and been pronounced clinically dead had spontaneously returned to life after hours without brain activity. The scientific establishment found itself in an unprecedented crisis of credibility. Peer-reviewed journals refused to publish papers describing the anomalous phenomena, fearing damage to their reputations. Yet the evidence was undeniable and reproducible. Laboratories around the world were independently confirming results that challenged the foundation of materialist science. The International Committee for Scientific Integrity called an emergency session in Geneva, bringing together Nobel laureates and leading researchers from every scientific discipline. The meeting was classified at the highest levels, but leaked transcripts revealed scientists admitting they were witnessing events that suggested the intervention of intelligence beyond human understanding. Dr. Chen found herself reluctantly considering explanations she would have dismissed as pseudoscience just months earlier. The mathematical precision of the supernatural events suggested they were following natural laws, but laws that operated according to principles unknown to human science. The number patterns were too consistent to be random. Exactly 1/3 of vegetation destroyed, precisely 1/3 of sea life killed, water contamination affecting exactly 1/3 of fresh water sources. The technological failures were equally systematic. Computer processors worldwide were experiencing calculation errors that followed predictable patterns, as if someone was introducing controlled chaos into digital systems. The errors weren't random glitches, but appeared to be guided by an intelligence capable of manipulating mathematics itself at the quantum level. Chapter 9: The Two Witnesses. The crowd gathering in Jerusalem's Old City had grown beyond anything the Israeli police could control. Word had spread through social media that two men claiming to be prophets from God had appeared at the Western Wall, demonstrating supernatural powers that defied rational explanation. The footage going viral showed them calling down fire from heaven to consume their critics and striking the earth with plagues at will. Rabbi Moshe Klein had been studying Torah for 40 years, but he'd never seen anything like these two figures. They spoke with authority that made ancient prophets seem timid by comparison. One appeared to be an elderly man with wild hair and clothing that seemed to be made from rough camel skin. The other was younger, but carried himself with regal bearing, as if accustomed to commanding armies and nations. "We are witnesses sent from the Almighty," the older man proclaimed to the growing crowd, his voice carrying clearly without any amplification system. "We are here to prophesy for 1260 days during this time of great tribulation." When skeptics in the crowd began shouting insults and throwing objects, the younger prophet merely looked at them with intense eyes. Fire literally streamed from his gaze, reducing the projectiles to ash before they could reach him. The Israeli government found itself in an impossible situation. These men were drawing crowds that created massive security risks in one of the world's most volatile religious sites. Yet every attempt to arrest or remove them had ended in humiliating failure. Police officers approaching the prophets found their weapons malfunctioning and their communication equipment failing. One particularly aggressive officer had been struck with temporary blindness that lasted exactly 24 hours. CNN, BBC, and every major news network established permanent broadcasting positions around the Western Wall. The two witnesses had become the most watched figures on Earth, with their daily pronouncements drawing larger audiences than the Super Bowl. They spoke in perfect Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and English, though witnesses swore they had never seen them consulting any notes or translation devices. Dr. Rebecca Stone, a biblical archaeologist from Oxford, recognized the profound theological implications. These figures matched biblical descriptions of the two witnesses mentioned in Revelation chapter 11. According to prophecy, they would prophesy for exactly 3.5 years, possess supernatural powers, and eventually be killed by the beast before being resurrected and taken to heaven. If the timeline was accurate, humanity was approximately halfway through the 7-year tribulation period. The witnesses' supernatural abilities became impossible to deny as they were captured on high-definition video from multiple angles. When they declared that no rain would fall on Earth during their ministry, meteorologists confirmed that weather patterns had shifted globally. When they spoke of turning water to blood, rivers and lakes around the world began showing the same transformation that had affected the oceans. Their predictions came true with mathematical precision. Religious pilgrims flooded into Jerusalem from every nation, creating the largest religious gathering in human history. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people from every faith tradition came to witness what many believed were humanity's final prophetic messengers. The Israeli government was forced to declare martial law just to manage the crowds, while Palestine authorities struggled to maintain order in areas under their control. The witnesses' message was both simple and terrifying. They proclaimed that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was executing final judgment on earth for humanity's rebellion against divine authority. They called for repentance and faith in Jesus Christ as the only path to salvation during the remaining tribulation period. Their words were broadcast live around the clock, with real-time translation into every major language. Opposition to the witnesses came from unexpected sources. The Antichrist, whose world government was still establishing control, found his authority challenged by these supernatural figures. He couldn't arrest them, couldn't silence them, and couldn't explain them away as elaborate hoaxes. Their very existence proved that supernatural forces were active in human affairs, undermining his claims of rational, scientific leadership. The psychological impact on global populations was enormous. Atheists and materialists found their worldviews crumbling as they watched undeniable miracles broadcast live on television. Religious believers felt vindicated, but terrified as they realized ancient prophecies were being fulfilled exactly as written. The two witnesses represented both humanity's greatest hope and its most terrifying confirmation that the end of the world was no longer theoretical. Chapter 10: Babylon Falls. The evacuation sirens began wailing across Manhattan at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time, though no government agency had ordered them. They seemed to activate themselves, creating an eerie harmony of warning sounds that echoed between the skyscrapers like a funeral dirge for civilization itself. Within minutes, social media exploded with videos of people streaming out of the city in panic, though most couldn't explain exactly why they felt compelled to flee. Maria Santos had lived in Queens her entire life, but something deep in her spirit was screaming at her to run. She grabbed her children and whatever belongings would fit in her Honda Civic, joining a traffic jam of biblical proportions as millions of other residents received the same inexplicable warning. The highways leaving New York City became parking lots of desperate humanity fleeing something they couldn't name, but somehow knew was coming. The financial district had been the beating heart of global capitalism for over a century. Wall Street's towering monuments to human ambition and greed housed the computers that processed trillions of dollars in daily transactions. The Federal Reserve Bank, the stock exchange, and the headquarters of the world's largest investment firms created a concentration of economic power that controlled the flow of money across the entire planet. At exactly noon, the sky above Manhattan began to darken despite clear weather forecasts. Meteorologists couldn't explain the massive cloud formation that seemed to materialize from nowhere, swirling in patterns that defied atmospheric physics. The clouds weren't made of water vapor, but appeared to consist of some kind of luminescent energy that pulsed with otherworldly light. The first bolt of lightning struck Goldman Sachs' headquarters with surgical precision, but this wasn't normal electrical discharge. The energy beam appeared to come directly from the supernatural cloud formation, burning with intense heat that turned steel and concrete into vapor instantly. Within seconds, similar strikes began hitting every major financial institution simultaneously across the city. Dr. James Mitchell, a seismologist at Columbia University, watched in horror as his instruments recorded impossible readings. The destruction wasn't following any natural pattern. No earthquake, no explosion, no known force could target specific buildings while leaving others completely untouched. The lightning strikes were hitting financial centers with mathematical precision while leaving residential areas completely unharmed. The global economic implications became clear within minutes. Every major financial network routing through New York experienced immediate catastrophic failure. The SWIFT system for international money transfers went dark. Credit card processing networks crashed worldwide. A TMS from Tokyo to London displayed error messages as their connections to New York's banking infrastructure vanished in columns of supernatural fire. The Port Authority's cameras captured the most stunning footage as massive cargo ships in New York Harbor suddenly burst into flames simultaneously. These weren't accidents or attacks. The ships ignited from within, as if their cargo holds had been struck by invisible lightning. The smoke rising from dozens of burning vessels created a black cloud visible from space, while their crews abandoned ship in lifeboats filled with terror. Television networks broadcasting from Manhattan found their signals cutting to static as the supernatural destruction reached their transmission towers. The last coherent broadcast showed a CNN reporter standing in Times Square, describing the apocalyptic scene behind her as skyscrapers burned with flames that seemed to consume steel and glass as easily as paper and wood. The prophecy from Revelation was being fulfilled with terrifying literalness. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. Satellite imagery showed the financial heart of the world's economy being systematically destroyed by forces that left no doubt about their supernatural origin. The destruction was too precise, too targeted, too impossible to be anything but divine judgment. Kings and merchants of the earth watched the live footage with growing horror, knowing their own economic systems were collapsing in real time. The London Stock Exchange suspended trading indefinitely. Tokyo's Nikkei crashed through every circuit breaker. European banks began failing as their connections to American financial networks disappeared in literal smoke and fire. The refugees streaming out of Manhattan carried with them eyewitness accounts that would haunt humanity forever. They described seeing the city's glass and steel monuments to human pride melting like wax under supernatural heat. The sound they reported wasn't like any earthly fire. It was the sound of judgment itself, a roaring that seemed to come from heaven and hell simultaneously. Chapter 11: The Hidden Gospel of Judas. In a climate-controlled vault beneath the University of Cambridge, Dr. Elena Vasquez carefully examined the ancient papyrus fragments that had arrived under mysterious circumstances 3 days after Babylon fell. The documents, written in Coptic script, claimed to be additional portions of the Gospel of Judas, texts that mainstream Christianity had suppressed for nearly 2,000 years because they challenged fundamental assumptions about the end times. The traditional Gospel of Judas, discovered in the Egyptian desert in the 1970s, had already shaken biblical scholarship by presenting Judas Iscariot not as Christ's betrayer, but as his most trusted disciple who fulfilled a necessary role in God's salvation plan. These new fragments went further, containing detailed descriptions of the apocalypse that didn't match the book of Revelation, but seemed to predict current events with startling accuracy. "The fire will consume the towers of greed," Dr. Vasquez read aloud to her research team, translating from the ancient Coptic text. "And the merchants of the earth will weep, for their merchandise of souls will be no more." The passage was clearly describing the destruction of Babylon, but it had been written 1,700 years before Manhattan existed. The Gospel fragments describe the end times as a period of spiritual awakening rather than physical destruction. According to this alternative Christian tradition, the catastrophic events weren't punishments from God, but birth pangs of humanity's evolution into higher consciousness. The trumpets, seals, and bowls of wrath were symbolic representations of the soul's journey through purification and enlightenment. Professor David Sterling from Harvard Divinity School joined the translation team via encrypted video conference, his excitement barely contained despite the global chaos surrounding them. These texts suggest that early Gnostic Christians understood the apocalypse as an internal spiritual process, not an external cosmic event. The beast isn't a political figure, but represents the ego's resistance to divine transformation. The implications were staggering for billions of religious believers currently interpreting world events through the lens of traditional biblical prophecy. If the Gnostic interpretation was correct, the supernatural catastrophes weren't signs of God's wrath, but catalysts for humanity's spiritual evolution. The 144,000 marked individuals might not be chosen for protection, but selected as guides to help others navigate the transformation process. The fragments contain detailed instructions for surviving the end times that had never appeared in canonical scripture. They described meditation techniques for maintaining inner peace during external chaos, methods for recognizing divine truth amid deceptive spiritual phenomena, and practices for developing supernatural abilities, similar to those demonstrated by the two witnesses in Jerusalem. Most controversial were the passages suggesting that Jesus had intended to teach these advanced spiritual principles to all his disciples, not just the inner circle. The gospel claimed that mainstream Christianity had deliberately suppressed this knowledge to maintain institutional control over believers, creating a religion based on fear and external authority rather than direct personal experience of divine consciousness. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a specialist in early Christian history at Princeton, pointed out disturbing parallels between the Gnostic texts and current events. The gospel fragments described false prophets who would perform genuine miracles while leading people away from inner truth toward external religious systems. This matched precisely what many believers were experiencing as they watched supernatural events but felt spiritually empty and confused. The ancient text warned specifically about the mark of the beast, describing it not as a physical mark, but as a spiritual condition of those who had surrendered their divine connection in exchange for material security. According to the Gospel of Judas, people who accepted external systems of control, whether religious or economic, would lose their ability to access higher consciousness. The timing of the document's discovery raised profound questions. How had these fragments survived for 17 centuries in perfect condition? Why were they surfacing now, just as the events they described were unfolding? Some scholars suggested the documents were elaborate forgeries designed to confuse people during the crisis, while others wondered if they represented divine revelation intended for this specific moment in history. Chapter 12: Islamic End Times Prophecies. The call to prayer echoed across Cairo as Imam Hassan climbed the minaret of Al-Azhar Mosque, but his sermon that Friday would be unlike any in the mosque's 1,000-year history. The events unfolding across the world matched Islamic prophecies about the end times with precision that could no longer be ignored, forcing him to confront possibilities that challenged his deepest theological assumptions. "My brothers and sisters," Hassan began, his voice carrying across the packed courtyard where thousands had gathered. "The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned us that the hour would come when the sun rises from the west, when the seas turn to blood, and when the earth shakes with mighty earthquakes. We are living in those days now. The Hadith literature contained detailed descriptions of events preceding Yawm al-Din that matched current global catastrophes almost perfectly. The Prophet had spoken of stars falling like ripe dates, of water sources becoming bitter and poisonous, and of great mountains falling into the sea. But Islamic eschatology also promised the appearance of specific figures who would guide believers through the final tribulation. In Tehran, Ayatollah Hosseini addressed similar crowds, discussing the Shia expectation of the hidden Imam's return. According to Twelver Shia theology, the Mahdi had been in occultation for over 1,000 years, waiting for the proper time to emerge and establish divine justice on earth. The current chaos suggested that time had arrived, though the Ayatollah cautioned against false messiahs who might appear before the true Mahdi. The prophecies described the emergence of the Dajjal, Islam's equivalent of the Christian Antichrist, as a one-eyed deceiver who would rule the world for exactly 40 days before being defeated by the returning Jesus. Muslim scholars noted disturbing parallels between the Dajjal's prophesied abilities and the technological surveillance systems being implemented by the New World government following Babylon's fall. Dr. Amina al-Zahra, a professor of Islamic eschatology at Cairo University, had spent years studying the convergence between Islamic and Christian end times prophecies. Her research revealed remarkable similarities that suggested both traditions might be describing the same sequence of events from different cultural perspectives. The return of Jesus, known in Islam as Isa ibn Maryam, was central to both apocalyptic narratives. The Islamic tradition taught that Jesus would return not as a divine figure, but as a prophet who would correct the theological errors that had crept into Christianity over the centuries. He would break the cross, kill the swine, and establish Islamic law across the earth before dying a natural death and being buried next to Muhammad in Medina. This interpretation created fascinating possibilities for religious unity during the end times. Muslim communities worldwide reported increasing dreams and visions that seemed to provide guidance for navigating the supernatural chaos. These experiences often featured the Prophet Muhammad or other revered figures, offering specific instructions for maintaining faith during the tribulation period. The consistency of these reports across different cultures and languages suggested they might represent genuine divine communication. The economic collapse following Babylon's destruction particularly resonated with Islamic prophecies about the end of usury-based financial systems. Islamic banking, which prohibited interest-based transactions, suddenly appeared more stable than conventional financial institutions that had been built on practices the Quran explicitly condemned. Some Muslim economists suggested that Sharia-compliant finance might provide a model for post-apocalyptic economic reconstruction. The appearance of the two witnesses in Jerusalem created complex theological challenges for Muslim observers. Islamic tradition expected Jesus to return to Damascus, not Jerusalem, and to arrive as a political and military leader rather than as a preacher performing miracles. Yet the supernatural abilities demonstrated by the witnesses matched descriptions of powers that would be granted to righteous believers during the end times. Sufi mystics reported particularly intense spiritual experiences during the global catastrophes, describing states of consciousness that allowed them to perceive divine presence within the apparent chaos. Their teachings about finding God through inner purification rather than external religious observance offered comfort to Muslims struggling to understand how a merciful Allah could permit such devastating events to unfold across the earth. Chapter 13, the Book of Enoch's Warnings. Hidden in the ancient monasteries of Ethiopia, far from the chaos consuming the modern world, Abuna Tekle carefully turned the pages of a leather-bound manuscript that most Christians had never heard of. The Book of Enoch, preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, contained prophecies about the end times that were proving more accurate than anyone had imagined possible. Unlike the canonical books of the Bible, Enoch provided detailed descriptions of the spiritual beings behind the apocalyptic events. The text described how fallen angels called Watchers had corrupted humanity in ancient times and would return during the last days to complete their rebellion against God. As Abuna Tekle read the ancient Ge'ez script by candlelight, the supernatural chaos outside seemed less random and more like the fulfillment of an ancient war between heaven and hell. Dr. Michael Heiser, a biblical scholar specializing in ancient texts, had been warning about Enoch's relevance for years before the catastrophes began. Speaking via satellite link from his bunker in Wisconsin, he explained to a global audience how Enochian prophecy filled gaps left by other biblical books. Enoch doesn't just describe what will happen, he said. It explains why it's happening and who's really pulling the strings behind the scenes. The book described giants called Nephilim, who were the hybrid offspring of fallen angels and human women. According to Enoch, these beings had been imprisoned beneath the earth since the time of Noah's flood, but would be released during the end times to terrorize humanity once again. Archaeological reports from around the world were beginning to describe discoveries that matched Enoch's descriptions with disturbing accuracy. Construction crews working on emergency relief projects had uncovered massive skeletal remains in locations from Siberia to the American Southwest. The bones showed humanoid characteristics, but belonged to beings that would have stood 12 to 15 feet tall when alive. Carbon dating was producing impossible results, with some samples showing ages that predated accepted human evolution timelines by hundreds of thousands of years. The Vatican's secret archives contained references to similar discoveries throughout church history, carefully catalogued and hidden from public knowledge. Cardinal Francesco Santos, speaking under condition of anonymity, admitted that the church had been aware of these remains for centuries, but had suppressed the information to avoid challenging established theological doctrines about human origins and the nature of evil. Enoch's description of the fallen angels teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity resonated particularly strongly with current events. The book claimed these beings had taught humans warfare, cosmetics, astrology, and advanced technology that corrupted civilization before the flood. The sudden appearance of quantum computing systems that enabled the mark of the beast suggested that similar supernatural knowledge transfer might be occurring again. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum physicist at MIT, had been tracking anomalies in advanced technology development that defied normal scientific progress. Computer systems were demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't be possible with current human understanding of physics and mathematics. The algorithms controlling global surveillance networks seemed to operate according to principles that human programmers couldn't fully comprehend or replicate.